Hello, everyone. Friendly reminder to please turn off your cell phones before we begin. And I've got a couple of little announcements, as I always do. On Wednesday this week, we have Cote-Saint-Luc's version of Canada Reads. So we're going to have 5 librarians defending 5 books. It's going to be here in the auditorium, 2 o'clock, hybrid if you cannot make it in person. Our defenders this year will be Jennifer Eisenman, Danielle Bélanger, Maria Morales, myself, Maria Racina, and I've missed one. It'll come to me. Oh, Katie Bezaire, of course. So please do come March 13th, this Wednesday. That is my main thing today. And also Kathy Diamond will be March 25th this month at 2 o'clock. So now, without further ado, here is Dr. Joe Schwarcz with Science Demystified.
Hey, we're getting to be a bigger crowd. Maybe we'll even get back to pre-COVID days when people were breaking down the doors, right? Yeah, it's getting back to a bit of normalcy, right? All right. One of the questions that I am most frequently asked is this one. And most people have some sort of idea about what the answer to that question is. If you have to decide between the two halves here, I think most people would know which way to go, right? Of course, whether whether they do it or not, that's a different story. Because although I think most people would recognize that the healthier foods are the fruits and vegetables here, not the ultra-processed foods, the fact is that in North America, people stuff themselves with the wrong stuff. And this is, it's sort of surprising because of the wealth of information that we have, you know, that's propelled towards us every day. Studies like this one, ultra-processed food increases your risk of cardiovascular disease. If you're not worried about cardiovascular disease, ultra-processed foods increase your risk of cancer. If you're not worried about cancer or heart disease, ultra-processed foods increase your chance of type 2 diabetes, right? So the information is out there, and it's not controversial, and yet most people do not follow it because the junky stuff tastes good. And the thing is that while, you know, people talk health, they eat taste. That's the truth of it. All right, so what should we be eating? And the age-old mantra that you've heard so often, let thy food be thy medicine, right? Ascribed to Hippocrates. Well, we have an issue right here because Hippocrates never said that. There is absolutely no evidence of he or any of his disciples ever saying that. Incidentally, a lot of the history of Hippocrates is mired in mystery. He did live. I mean, there's no question about that Hippocrates was a real person in the 5th century BC. But many of the writings that are supposedly, you know, coming from him actually came from what is known as the school of Hippocrates, his students, his disciples, etc. Because there's just way too much of Hippocratic writings to have come from one person. Incidentally, the word hypocrite has nothing to do with Hippocrates. That's a common misconception. One thing, though, that Hippocrates really deserves credit for is that he made the distinction between disease as being caused by natural phenomena and, as was widely believed up to his time by the ancient Greeks, that disease was punishment by the gods for something that you did wrong. And Hippocrates was really the first one to take issue with that and said that disease really was caused by something going wrong in the body. Today, of course, this idea that you are what you eat and that food can be medicine is all over the place. I mean, you just go into a bookstore these days and this is what you'll find. Dozens and dozens of such books. And the illustrations that go along with these books parallel the idea that food is tantamount to medicine. Well, of course, this is somewhat overplayed, but obviously there is something to this. Because face it, food is the only raw material that ever goes into our body, right? So obviously, we are constructed of the food that we eat. Well, not literally, of course, but not unliterally either, because our body is a fascinating machine. Of course, it's the most fascinating machine in the world. And it deconstructs the food that we eat and reconstructs it into what is needed by the body. But every single protein, every molecule of fat, every molecule of carbohydrate, of which our body is composed, originate in food. With the body, of course, manipulating the food ingredients and converting them into useful tissues, into blood, and to all of the chemicals that cruise through our body. We are really nothing but a large bag of chemicals. That's what the human body is, with thousands of chemical reactions going on all the time, continuously. And most of the time, it all works. And the more you know about the body, the more incredible it is that anyone is ever healthy, because you know all of the things that can go wrong and how much has to go right in order for people to be healthy. All right, so given that, what should we be eating? Well, as you know, these days, what is really in vogue is what has been called the Mediterranean diet. However, this is not such a simple concept, because the Mediterranean, of course, is a large area, and there are a lot of countries around the Mediterranean. So there's no one Mediterranean diet. The diet in Turkey is not the same as the diet in Italy or the diet in Libya or the diet in Croatia, even though all of these countries are around the Mediterranean. And when you see pictures, and of course the internet is full of pictures of what the so-called Mediterranean diet is, there is some common feature to all of these pictures. Even though there are different countries with slightly different diets, around the Mediterranean, but what you do not see in these pictures is a lot of red meat. It is mostly fish, although they do eat some red meat. And you see, of course, a lot of fruits, a lot of vegetables, a lot of whole grains. There are hundreds of such pictures on the internet on what comprises the Mediterranean diet. So here, for example, you see it's very similar to the one that we just looked at, but there is some red meat there. So it's not a totally vegetarian diet. And then you'll see very often olive oil that is featured in the Mediterranean diet, along with nuts, etc. So although there is no one diet that can be defined as the Mediterranean diet, what all of these have in common is relatively little meat, lots of whole grains, lots of vegetables, and the main fat that is used is olive oil. That's what they have in common. Now, what does Western science make of all of this? Well, if you look to Health Canada, and we look at Canada's food guide, which is actually very nicely encapsulated pictorially here. This is Canada's food guide. And indeed, it is very close to what we have just looked at, very close to the Mediterranean diet. Because as you can see, half the plate is fruits and vegetables. And then you have the whole grains, and then you have the proteins. Now, notice that the proteins, while there is some meat there, you don't have to have meat because there's all kinds of sources of protein. Tofu, beans, eggs, nuts, etc. So indeed, the diet that is recommended by Health Canada is very similar to the so-called Mediterranean diet. The only problem is people don't follow it. So, there it is. It's publicized everywhere. But when you do surveys of what people are eating, you find that it doesn't parallel what Health Canada guidelines are. Now, there are other interesting questions that come up about eating specific meals. I mean, you've heard the expression that breakfast is the most important meal of the day. Where does it originate? Well, actually, it traces back to Adele Davis, who was one of the first nutritional gurus. She rose to fame in the 1960s, and eat breakfast like a king, lunch like a prince, and dinner like a pauper. It's kind of a nice sounding statement, right? The fact is that there's no evidence for this. When you take a look at all of the studies, and indeed there are a lot of studies, there are a lot of studies about everything. It turns out that if you want to find a study why breakfast is the most important meal of the day, you will find it. If you don't like that idea, you can find a study that tells you that breakfast is not the most important meal of the day. Because a lot of this is based on opinion. It's not based on controlled experiments. Well, talking about opinion, I'll give you mine about breakfast. While I don't think, we can say it's the most important meal of the day, we can talk about what a good breakfast might consist of. Here's my idea. You can see the berries, avocado toast, banana, chia seeds, flax seeds, yogurt, and coffee. In fact, that's what I have every morning. And there's reason for this. Now, I said it's an opinion, but I've been in this business a long time, poring over scientific journals for 50 years. So, the opinion is founded on something. I don't pull these things out of thin air. There's a lot of literature on the berries. And, we've spoken about this before. And, you hear this all over the place. That berries are a very, very good source of compounds we call polyphenols. Now, the term polyphenol refers to a class of molecules. It refers to a specific molecular structure, not important in our situation here. But these are found in plant products, and berries are especially rich in these. And once again, you can find studies that show that a diet high in polyphenols will lower your blood sugar, increase your insulin sensitivity, decrease cancer risk, all of this stuff. Truth be told, you can also find studies that show that, this is overstated. But when you put all of the studies together, certainly one concludes that eating berries is a good thing to do. Now, I mentioned the banana. The benefit of banana is potassium. And potassium is as important for blood pressure control as eliminating sodium is. So more potassium is good. More sodium, of course, is not good. Now, the flax seeds and the chia seeds, these are very good sources of what we call omega-3 fats. The most famous omega-3 fats, of course, are the ones that you find in fish. And there are all kinds of studies about reducing, risk of especially heart disease. The omega-3 fats that are found in these seeds are not exactly the same as the ones that are found in fish, but they're close enough. it's worthwhile to eat them. Although I got to tell you, with the flax seeds, it is best to grind them, because if you don't, they come out the way that they went in. The chia seeds are very small anyway, and they're easily digested. Now, for the avocado toast, avocado does contain fat. It is the fattiest of all fruits, but the fat in avocado is of the monounsaturated variety, which is the same as you have in olive oil, which is cardiovascularly friendly. But of course, it still has calorie count of attributed to the fat. But it has a very high load of fiber, which, as you'll see later on, is indeed a very important part of the diet. Now, as far as advertising goes, they tell you it's cholesterol-free. Well, all plant products are cholesterol-free. Cholesterol is only found in animal foods. Gluten-free, well, of course it's gluten-free. It's not a grain. It is low in sodium, but so is every plant product. And high in fiber, well, that's meaningful, because we want to take in at least 25 grams of fiber a day. And when you think about that, that's about 1/4 of that. That's a very good good dose. Plus, avocado tastes good, especially when you put it on sourdough bread. And here, there's a lot to take in when we talk about bread, because, as you know, there are so many varieties of bread out there. From the spongy marshmallow, like, palm or Western bread, which, it's even a travesty to call that bread, to the real stuff, which is made with whole grains that are fermented. That's sourdough bread is fermented, which means that it has bacteria added, and those bacteria produce useful compounds. There's a lot of fiber in sourdough bread. And the benefit of this is that when the fiber gets into your colon, the bacteria that it delivers will combat any disease-causing bacteria that already may be in the colon. So today, there's a lot of discussion about the so-called microbiome, which is this numerous families of bacteria that live in our colon. And, we used to think that they're just sort of bystanders. They just watch life go by. But they're not. They're very active in the way our body functions. And this we've just, learned recently. There are actually more bacterial cells in the human body than there are human cells. We're more bacteria than human. So the bacteria do interact with our cells. And there are studies coming out all the time about the human microbiome and why this is a key to our health. And the best way to increase the concentration of the good bacteria in our gut is with so-called prebiotics. And prebiotics are foods that feed the good bacteria so that they can multiply. And you have these in things like sourdough bread, and as you'll see later on, you get that in yogurt as well. I also mentioned coffee along with the breakfast, and coffee is actually, amazingly, the #1 source of antioxidants in the North American diet. That's because so much coffee is consumed. And here we have a classic example of how a certain amount of coffee can be beneficial, but more detrimental. There is the Goldilocks effect, that you have to take a look, not too little, not too much, just right. But what is the just right? Well, the consensus today is that if you're 3 to 4 cups or less a day, that's fine. If you are going to drink more, then you start worrying about staying awake at night and being jittery, etc. So anyway, so that's my breakfast. Now the question, of course, do I have any evidence for it? No. I don't have any scientific evidence for it because it's virtually impossible to get such evidence. Because what would we have to do? We'd have to have a group of people eating what I just described to you for years and compare them to a group that is equivalent in every way, except that they would be eating a different breakfast. So they might be eating eggs and toast. Or compare them to a group that is eating oatmeal every morning, or eating cereal every morning. It's not doable, right? You cannot do such a study because we're not talking about doing this for a week, which you might conceivably be able to do. You'd have to do this for years because if there's any impact on the differences in these kind of breakfasts, it would be over years. So what do? We make educated guesses based on the information that we've collected. So that's what I described to you. And I think that based on all of that, we can make a case for having the avocado toast, for having the berries, the chia seeds, the flax seeds, the yogurt with a nice cup of coffee. And it can be supported by evidence. However, I'm not an extremist. And certainly there's the odd day when I don't mind stopping in at Premier Moisson for their chausson aux pommes, which is, of course, full of sugar and full of fat. But boy, does it ever taste good. All right. So, I certainly wouldn't do that every day. So the moral of the story is that you try to go by the scientific evidence, but you don't have to be crazy about it. You're not going to step one foot into a grave if you have, this for breakfast one day. But you don't want to do that every day because it is a lot of salt and it is a lot of sugar. All right, well, let's get down to talking about this business of let thy food be thy medicine. And let's see what verity there is. Are there really some foods that would fall into that category? Well, one nice one to examine, because of all the tradition around it, all of the publications, is chicken soup. So the question is, can we make a case for chicken soup being Jewish penicillin, as it has often been called? Well, the first thing to understand is that the first people who actually recognized that there might be some value in chicken soup were the Chinese. They were almost the first people to do everything. And as early as the 2nd century BCE, they talked about chicken soup as being a yang food that warms the body and has an invigorating effect. However, of course, when you bring up chicken soup, the physician, scientist that most people think of is Maimonides. Now, Maimonides was, 12 centuries, 14 centuries after the Chinese had introduced chicken soup. But he certainly is very often given credit for bringing the chicken soup messiah who introduced chicken soup to people. Let's take a look at Maimonides' history because it's very interesting. Let's go back to 6th century BCE, when the area that now is mostly Israel and Jerusalem already was the capital, and the Babylonians expelled the Jews and burned down Jerusalem. And the expelled Jews ended up in southern Spain, which is where Maimonides was born. He was born in 1138 in Cordoba in southern Spain. However, not long after, the area was conquered by the Almohad, and they were an extreme Muslim people, and they forced Christians and Jews to leave. So Maimonides had to leave southern Spain and ended up in Egypt. He settled in Cairo. And this is where he spent most of his career. He was a philosopher, he was a physician, he was a scientist. Of course, in those days, people didn't have professions per se. They delved into many different areas in life. But he certainly was very much interested in medicine. And he did follow in the footsteps of Galen and Hippocrates, the ancient Greek physicians. Hippocrates, of course, very often called the father of medicine. Whether or not that's correct or not, that would be discussion for another time. But Galen and Hippocrates laid the foundation to medicine. Hippocrates, as I said, was the first one to say that diseases were not due to punishment by gods. And Galen followed in his footsteps. But their philosophy was based on the four humors. So no, it wasn't the gods who affected people's health. It was stuff within their body. The four humors, which were called yellow bile, black bile, phlegm, and blood. These were the four fluids in the body. And the thinking was if they were somehow out of balance, that's when disease would ensue. And what the ancient physicians tried to do was to rebalance the body's so-called humors. Now, Maimonides had ideas about how to do this. He said a physician should begin with simple treatment, trying to cure by hygiene and diet before administering drugs. That was pretty good advice. Keep the patient, quiet and clean, etc., and see if nature will heal the disease. But when he was talking about food and diet, this is where the first mention of chicken soup comes in. And this indeed is documented. Meat and broth of chickens that rectify corrupted humors, especially black bile that causes melancholy. So if any of you think that you're overbrimming with black bile, go and have some chicken soup. See what it does to your melancholy. Anyway, he became a famous physician. So famous that, in fact, he became physician to the Sultan in Egypt. And he was a prolific writer on health matters. Maimonides wrote manuscripts, wrote books of all kinds, treatises on all kinds of diseases. He wrote a treatise on hemorrhoids, a treatise on aphrodisiacs, on asthma, poisons and antidotes. That's pretty interesting because that one turns out to be pretty scientific. Snake bites. He had a way of treating them, which was actually very logical. And as you can see here, it was with a tourniquet because he understood that the snake injected a poison. And if you prevented that from going elsewhere in the body, you put on a tourniquet. And you know why that was very interesting that he came to that conclusion? Because he didn't understand the circulatory system, right? That didn't come around until the 17th century with William Harvey. So even without any understanding of circulatory system, he understood that that poison would somehow flood the body. He also had the treatment of cupping, which is still with us today, where you take a cup, you heat up the air inside, and you quickly clamp it onto the body, and you create a vacuum. And the idea is that it sucks the poisons out of the body. It's total nonsense. But you see athletes today with these red rings on their body. Of course, it has a placebo effect, but that is all that it has. So Maimonides really was a very interesting character because it was an age of superstition and irrationality. And he advocated for reason and for scientific investigation and clean water and healthy diet. And look at this, a physician must exercise rational thinking, compassion, humility, and dedication. Well, isn't that what we would expect from doctors today? And then again, going back to what we talked about before, you should try everything else before becoming more heavy-handed. And of course, what he meant by that, things to try, would be chicken soup. But he did overstate the case. And of course, we see those kind of overstatements today, very often as well about all kinds of things. Because if you look at some of Maimonides' doctrine, you can see the things that he recommended chicken soup for, corrupted tumors, leprosy, body constitution, or whatever, for pneumonia, for impotence. So it's a real mixture of sense and nonsense. He also recommended, as you can see, chicken testicles for weakness or convalescence from illness. Not totally ridiculous, because chicken testicles contain steroids. They do contain testosterone, which could, in theory, have a minor effect. So patients came to Maimonides and were treated, and indeed very often with chicken soup. But the claims that he made of treating leprosy with chicken soup, of course, have no foundation. Leprosy is a bacterial infection. You're not going to treat that with chicken soup. But nevertheless, the idea that chicken soup was good for sick people spread. And in the Middle Ages, it was a common treatment. If someone was sick, they would be given chicken soup. Okay, but now we come to the sort of the serious health claims that chicken soup can actually cure disease. There's a classic line, Fiddler on the Roof, from Tevye. I'm sure many of you remember that line. When a poor man eats a chicken, one of them is sick, right? So by the early 1900s, which was the era of Fiddler on the Roof, the idea that chicken soup is essentially a medication was prevalent. But it wasn't until the 1970s that some researchers said, let's take a look at this. Is there something to this? And the first scientific study goes back to 1978. And they looked at drinking hot water, cold water, chicken soup, either drinking it or drinking it through a straw from a closed cup, because they wanted to at least control for vapors coming out. And they found some interesting stuff. They found that the chicken soup increased the rate at which mucus came out of the nose, which they interpreted as being a positive thing, right? Because as the mucus comes out, it eliminates the viruses that have infected. Bit of a stretch, but anyway, they came up with some very interesting gear to measure this. They had a special face mask built, that would be able to determine nasal flow. So this study got a lot of publicity, but none of the reports mentioned that the hot water had the same effect as the chicken soup, because that didn't make for good headlines, right? Well, the idea of chicken soup and health lay dormant for a couple of decades. And then this study came out, which was a more serious study about chicken soup inhibiting neutrophil chemotaxis in vitro. Well, several things to discuss here. First of all, I mean, you know what the term in vitro means. It means in the lab. It literally means in glass, right? It means in a Petri dish or in a test tube. The human body is not a large test tube. So one is always wary about jumping to any conclusions based on a study that was done in a petri dish or in the test tube. It doesn't mean that those are invalid, because you got to start somewhere. So you first check to see if there's some sort of effect in the laboratory. If there is, then you proceed, to animals and hopefully to humans. But you can't put too much emphasis on something that you find just in the laboratory. You need studies with living systems. But anyway, so what did they do in this? And what is this neutrophil chemotaxis all about? Neutrophils are white blood cells, and they're part of the immune system. And what they do is they engulf and destroy invaders, such as viruses, such as bacteria. And chemotaxis is the ability of these neutrophils to seek out foreign intruders like bacteria or viruses, because those intruders release chemicals that are picked up by the immune cells. So when we talk about chemotaxis, what we are talking about is the attack of the white blood cells on the invader. The invader sends out signals, chemicals, that are sensed by the cells of the immune system. They hunt down the invader. So what did they find with the chicken soup? What they found was that the chicken soup inhibited this interaction, so that the white blood cells did not seek out the invader quickly. Now, how is this beneficial? Because it is the interaction of the white blood cells with the invader that causes the symptoms of the common cold. It's when they break down the invader and the body tries to eliminate it, that's when you get the symptoms. So if you inhibit this chemotaxis, you inhibit the symptoms, but it will also take longer to get better, because you're also inhibiting the white blood cells from attacking the invader. So it was an interesting study, but its applicability to humans is highly questionable. So the chicken soup may make you feel a little bit better in reducing the symptoms, but the cold will last longer. So really the reason to eat chicken soup is because you like it, right? As far as reducing the effect of the common cold, hot water will probably do the same thing. But the chicken soup indeed does taste better. Now, Maimonides, as I told you, was a prolific writer. And some of the stuff that he said about chicken soup has been corroborated in the sense that it's good not only for the body, but also good for the soul. And this is an interesting study. This goes back to about 2011, where they found that chicken soup comforts people, that it's a real comfort food, and that when you're not feeling well and you eat the chicken soup, what it does is it brings back memories of good times, because most people first were exposed to chicken soup when they were young, right? And family dinners and dinners with friends, etc. So those thoughts come back to you. And this is why you see those books, chicken soup is good for the soul, etc. But as far as it being the Jewish penicillin, that's a bit of an overstatement. If you have a bacterial disease, you need the real penicillin, right? But the chicken soup may give you just a touch of comfort. However, Maimonides really does deserve to be remembered because of his emphasis on making observations and coming to conclusions, and on not using so-called drugs when simple interventions would work. So he deserves a statue that sits in Cordoba in front of the house where he is said to have lived. And Sir William Osler who, of course, probably the most famous Canadian physician, he was at McGill. He said that he was not only the physician of princes, but the prince of physicians. So interesting character, Maimonides. But as you know, there always is a but when you take a look at someone. He was a Talmudic scholar, and he really explained the Talmud in understandable terms. The Talmud is centuries of combined Jewish wisdom and rules about how to conduct your life. And he was able to explain this in simple terms. But he also thought that men should rule the house like a king, and a woman who refuses to do the work to which she is obliged may be forced to do so even with a stick. Yeah, that would not go over so well these days, right? But he made up for it by saying that truth does not become more true by the virtue of the fact that the entire world agrees with it, nor less so if the entire world disagrees with it. Now, that is something that we can really relate to with the current political situation, where just about the whole world sees something that is right as being wrong. All right, let's go on to the other food that has a history of being intertwined with health, and that is yogurt. Obviously, there are many people that we can talk about when it comes to health benefits of yogurt, but there's no question that we have to start with Ilya Mechnikov, the Russian scientist who basically was a naturalist. He was very much interested in natural world, not a medical doctor. He wrote a number of books on nature, and he eventually got the Nobel Prize in 1908 in physiology or medicine. Remember, the prize is physiology or medicine. You don't have to be a physician to get the Nobel Prize in this category. So what did Mechnikov get the Nobel Prize for? A classic experiment that he carried out with the larvae of starfish. He placed a thorn into the larva, and he investigated what happens. And what he discovered was the phenomenon that we refer to as phagocytosis. This is when a microbe, be it a bacterium or a virus, is recognized by immune system cells, and these cells gobble it up and destroy it and spew out the remnants. And this is basically how the immune system works. There are a large variety of different kinds of immune cells, but what they do is they seek out an invader and they destroy it. This is the subject for which Mechnikov received the Nobel Prize. However, as he got older, he got interested in other things, as everyone does when they get older. They become interested in things that didn't matter when they were young, because when you're young, you never worry about dying, right? When you get older, you realize that you're not getting out of life alive, and you want to stay in there as long as you can. And he began to think about this, and he had noted that Bulgarian peasants lived a long time. They had impressive longevity. Of course, birth certificates were hard to come by in those days, so it's hard to know how he came to this conclusion. But the Bulgarians really did eat a lot of yogurt. That's for sure. They did, and they still do. And he became very interested in this. And in fact, in 1904, he gave a lecture where he talked about this Bulgarian bacillus, which is, of course, what is used to make yogurt. We call it lactobacillus. And this is what converts milk into yogurt. And he said that the Bulgarians are well known for their longevity. And he said that aging is caused by harmful bacteria inhabiting the intestines, right? A premonition of what we talk about now with the microbiome. And beneficial bacteria have to be cultivated in the intestines by eating yogurt. This was 100 years ago. So he was really, really on the forefront of this. But after he gave this talk, the newspapers, of course, picked this up as they would today. And Le Temps, which was at that time a main French newspaper, had this headline: "Those of you pretty ladies and brilliant gentlemen who don't want to age or die, here's the precious recipe: eat yogurt." Chicago Daily Tribune: "Sour milk is elixir. Secret of long life discovered by Professor Metchnikoff." Products began to be sold, pure cultures, so that you could make your yogurt at home. Well, you can buy these today. You can buy these cultures. And as you can see, prepared according to instructions of Professor Metchnikoff. He became very famous because of this. Of course, he had never exactly said that. He didn't say you're going to live forever. So when he saw all of these articles in the newspapers, he did make a correction. Clearly, we do not look upon the milk microbes as an elixir of longevity or remedy against aging, he wrote. This question will be resolved only in a more or less distant future. Well, some of that has been resolved. We know that it is beneficial to have these bacteria. No, there's nothing that's going to make you live forever. The cartoonists, of course, had a field day with this. And Metchnikoff was seen as being the manufacturer of centenarians. So you can see he's making his yogurt, and here are all these centenarians that he is manufacturing. One of the visitors to his lab was Dr. John Harvey Kellogg. He, of course, of cereal fame. And when he visited Metchnikoff, he noted that Metchnikoff always had a pitcher of yogurt nearby. And Kellogg really took to this. And he became essentially a prophet for yogurt. John Harvey Kellogg was a medical doctor, and he founded the SAN, as it became to be called, in Battle Creek, Michigan. He actually coined the term sanitarium, not sanitarium, sanitarium. That was his term. And the place came to be called the SAN, where people came to be cured of diseases they never had. Kellogg was a very, very interesting character. He became enamored of yogurt, and he made sure that when his patients came to the SAN, there would always be yogurt served. Not only that, he also had this machine. Anyone know what that is? That was to administer yogurt enemas. Because he thought, if we want to get these live bacteria into our gut, why go through the stomach where they may not survive due to the acidity? Much easier to put them directly into the colon. There was a wonderful movie made about Kellogg. It's called The Road to Wellness. Any of you seen that? It was a great movie. I would urge you, if you can find it, I'm sure you can find it on one of the streaming services, with Anthony Hopkins playing the role of Dr. Kellogg. It really is a great movie. It looks comedic, but in fact, it represents the era very well. Battle Creek, Michigan became the cereal capital of the world. And cereal was hyped as being a health food. Anyway, in the movie, there's a classic scene where Hopkins, playing Kellogg, is talking to a patient. And telling the patient about the importance of yogurt. And the patient says, but Dr. Kellogg, I don't like to eat yogurt. And Hopkins, with this gleam in his eye, says, oh, you won't be eating it. It was going to be administered to the rear portals. Not everyone was enamored of this whole love affair with yogurt. Dr. Harvey Wiley, who was head of chemistry at the Department of Agriculture in the US, and he was in charge of safety of food supply. And this was the forerunner of the FDA. And Wiley was really a fascinating person, and he carried out studies using volunteers, making them eat things that he thought might be poisonous to find out what is okay and what is not okay in the food supply. And he thought that all of this talk about yogurt was too much. He was also against saccharin. He was against some food dyes. So he was right about many things. And but he, for a while, put a stop to the yogurt bandwagon. And Dr. Harvey Wiley is regarded as the father of pure food law. And this was passed in 1906, the first time that the government intervened with food in terms of what is allowed to be sold and what not. Today, of course, yogurt culture is with us. You can buy Bulgarian yogurt, you can buy yogurt of any kind. And you can also increase the concentration of these good bacteria in your gut by what we call probiotics. So probiotics already contain beneficial bacteria. Mostly Lactobacillus bulgaricus is the one to talk about. And that's the bacteria that is used to make fermented cabbage, right? Fermented pickles, etc. So there are probiotic foods out there. And the idea is that if you eat these, you will increase the concentration of the beneficial bacteria in your gut. And every day, new studies come out about the possible benefits of these gut bacteria and about eating probiotics, which are the bacteria themselves, or eating prebiotics, which are compounds that feed the bacteria and make them multiply. And there are the health benefits that are constantly being advertised. And many of these can be supported by science. And of course, you can also go into the pharmacy these days and you will see shelf upon shelf of probiotics. Very few different types of bacteria actually that you find in there. And this makes for difficult decisions because there are hundreds of different species of so-called good bacteria in our gut, and nobody really knows which are the best ones. But so they make guesses at these. But mostly you don't have randomized trials to back these up, but there's certainly no reason not to eat them. Now, it's not, yogurt is not, of course, not the only food that contains cultured bacteria. Other societies have discovered this as well. The Koreans were already eating kimchi in 3000 BC. And kimchi is a fermented food. How do you make it? It's cabbage, red pepper powder, garlic, ginger, radish, anchovy juice, sugar, green onions. You let this sit around, the naturally occurring bacteria in the food will multiply. This is usually stored in these ongi, which are the traditional vessels in which the Koreans make kimchi. And kimchi is loaded with beneficial bacteria. Unfortunately, it's also loaded with salt. You have to be very careful with that because many of these fermented foods, like pickles, contain a huge amount of salt. I mean, you might be shocked to know if you take a dill pickle, one dill pickle, that can have about 1,000 milligrams of sodium in it, one dill pickle. Compare that to the 1,500 milligrams of sodium that we should be eating a whole day. So although, there are certainly benefits to these fermented foods, you have to be very careful about the salt content. But kimchi is a part of Korean life. And when the first Korean astronaut went into space, she took along kimchi and she served it to the fellow cosmonauts. So the Koreans are very much into kimchi, and Korean longevity is pretty good. Now, whether or not you can attribute to kimchi or to just the general, fact that they eat a lot more fruits and vegetables and not that much meat. Well, what about Mechnikov? How did he end up with all of his yogurt eating? He died at the age of 71. And that's his second wife there, who, when Mechnikov died, she made a plaster cast, a death mask of his face. And that's it. That's the Mechnikov death mask. He had two wives. The first wife died of tuberculosis. She already was sick when he married her, and she had to be carried in a chair to the altar when they were married. And he contemplated suicide. He actually attempted suicide after his first wife died. And then he got married a second time. Second wife also got sick. He attempted suicide again, but unsuccessfully, and she survived and he survived. And as you can see, he died before she did. He was cremated, and you can visit him if you go to the Pasteur Institute in Paris, because that's where he worked for the last 20 years of his life. He spent it working for and with Pasteur, and his urn with his remains is in the Pasteur Institute. So as you can see, the story of chicken soup and yogurt is an interesting one. And, when you delve into anything deeper and deeper, it becomes more and more interesting. So what's the conclusion here? Eat chicken soup because you like it. You probably will feel a little bit better if you're down in the dumps after eating it, because you'll remember the good times when you share chicken soup with others. Be careful with the commercial chicken soups, loaded with salt. Take a look at, if you buy the Campbell's chicken soup, well, don't buy it. It contains way too much salt. So it's important to watch, sodium intake. And when you make your own chicken soup, then of course you can control the amount of salt that you put into it. And as far as the yogurt goes, just don't buy the ones that have added sugar. And the ones that are flavored, you see all kinds of blueberry flavored, raspberry flavored, etc. Those will all have sugar added to it, which you don't need. Neither do you need the artificial sweeteners in it. So buy the simplest yogurt, not any flavor. Yogurt itself is good enough in terms of flavor. You don't need to add anything. So it's usually labeled as natural. And you can get the Astra, or it's all kinds of brands. But be careful with the ones that are flavored, because the sugar content can be astounding. So with the fermented foods, watch the salt. With the yogurt, watch the sugar. All right. Anyone have any questions? Yeah. Yeah. There's no nutritional difference. The difference is in texture. The Greek yogurt will be much thicker. It doesn't matter. It's all a question of taste. Yeah. Well, you can look for it, but I don't know how meaningful it is. The real problem with the bacteria is that your stomach is very acidic. The pH of your stomach is about 1.5. That's very acidic. and many bacteria don't survive that. So actually, Kellogg was right about going in the other direction. But generally, I mean, you want to look for at least billions, okay? And you want to look for 5 billion per serving. That gives you kind of a benchmark. Yeah. Yeah. Chocolate, whichever you like. I mean, the idea that chocolate is a health food has been grossly overplayed. Uh, yes, cocoa has antioxidants, actually quite rich in antioxidants, but so are all kinds of plant products. And if you want to have a good dose of antioxidants, you'd have to eat far more chocolate than you'd eat blueberries or raspberries. You know? So eat chocolate by all means if you like the chocolate, right? I mean, if you want to argue, yes, I mean the dark chocolate would have more cocoa powder in it than the milk chocolate. Is it gonna make a difference in your life? I don't think so. Carob? Yeah. Well, carob is sort of a chocolate substitute, right? Tastes like crap. So, I mean, what is the point of having a substitute for chocolate if it doesn't taste like chocolate? And carob does not taste like chocolate. So, yeah. Well, it's hard to make a blanket statement on that. In some cases, frozen is actually more nutritious because when some vegetables or fruits, like peas, for example, are picked, they're frozen right away. So the nutrients are locked in when you freeze it. Sometimes nutrients are lost during transport. So if it's fresh, it may be days until it ends up on your dinner table, by which time you've lost some nutrients. With canned, of course, will last a long time, but you have to be careful with the canned foods because they'll often have a lot of salt. But if it comes to berries, for example, and you're looking at nutritional value, the frozen is identical. It's identical. The only trouble is the texture is not, right? When you first buy the frozen berries, they look good, right? And they feel good. And then you thaw them out and it becomes mush. But the mush has the same nutrient value. It's a question of you want to eat mush or you want to eat fresh berries. Yeah. Between kefir and yogurt, virtually the same product. It's both are made by fermentation with bacteria. Kefir is more liquidy, so it's more of a beverage, whereas yogurt you eat with a spoon. But nutritional value is the same. Yeah. Again, with the kefir too, yeah, be careful with the flavoring because you can get the blueberry kefir. Take a look at the sugar content of that. It's grotesque. Yeah. Honey is sugar. I mean, the reason to eat honey is if you like the taste of honey, which is fine. I mean, it's you're not going to eat gallons of it. But if you put honey in there or you put sugar in there, nutritionally it's the same. Yeah. Oh yeah, sure, many. I mean, all the pickled products, pickled vegetables. The sauerkraut is a classic example. Yeah, but again, with sauerkraut, it's very salty. Yeah, yeah. Well, I can give you I can give you a rhyme and verse on this because I was on a cruise last week on the largest ship in the world, Icon of the Seas. Unbelievable. 7,000 people, 3,000 crew. Of the 7,000, 3,500 obese. No, but at least 1,000. Yeah. No, not pleasantly plump. Yeah, morbidly obese. They're going around in these electric carts that the ship had, dozens and dozens of those electric carts. And of course, they're driving up to the buffet, going from one to the next. I know it's incredible, incredible. The ship is unbelievable. I mean, that the fact that this could be built. There's three theaters on it, all Broadway theater size. One is with an ice rink, fantastic ice show. Another one is a water show. And I can tell you it was better than Cirque du Soleil's O, which I've seen in Vegas. And the theater performance was The Wizard of Oz. It was fantastic. It was at least as good as anything I've ever seen on Broadway, probably better. The special effects, unbelievable. When it starts when there's a tornado, right, and Dorothy's taken up. Well, the house starts spinning and spins into the air over the audience, and you feel the wind. I don't even know how they did it, but this is Royal Caribbean. Yeah, it was indescribable, this ship. 40 restaurants on the ship. 40. Well, you got to cater to the fat people. Yeah. And a lot more than 40 bars because you got to cater to them too. Yeah. They charge for the alcohol. Everything is included except the alcohol. Alcohol is not included. Yeah. Yeah. Everything else is included. Yeah. That's why, you see the gluttony. I mean, people overeat because there's so many good things to eat. Everything from. Oh yeah, you can eat 24 hours a day. Yeah, yeah. It's an experience. I mean, this ship is. If you were just plunked down on it, you wouldn't believe that you're on a ship. There's a huge park in the center of the ship, open air park with thousands of flowers and trees and yeah, just amazing. Yeah. Oh, the calories of my breakfast, it's maybe 400 or 500, depending on how much yogurt you put. So it's very moderate.
We have a question from the Zoomers.
Fruit juice? Yeah, well, fruit juice has an awful lot of sugar. The sugar content of fruit juice is the same as of soft drinks. But of course, you're getting some vitamins and minerals. Yeah, I mean, the concern is the sugar content. Yeah. Well, the Zoomers had a question?
Yes, we have a few. Turmeric and garlic in chicken soup, do they have a healing effect?
Well, the turmeric and garlic thing, again, there are some studies that show benefits, but the amount of turmeric and garlic that you would have to eat to see any benefit is not an amount that you would comfortably eat. So if you like the taste of turmeric, which actually doesn't have much taste, it's more color, and if you like the taste of garlic, which does have a taste, obviously, by all means, put it in there. But, in terms of thinking that this is going to have any kind of significant health effect, I don't think so.
Does decaf coffee have the same positive effect as regular coffee?
Almost. the decaffeination process does take out some of the antioxidants, but yeah, I would say that that's not significant. Yeah, I just don't understand why you would drink decaf coffee. Kind of misses the point.
Anything wrong with stevia as a sugar substitute?
No, nothing wrong with stevia as a sugar substitute. All the sugar substitutes have passed the regulatory hurdles. These things are not randomly put into our food supply. The trouble with all of these sweeteners is that they increase your desire for sweets. That's the problem with it. So and also, we have study upon study upon study showing that people who use artificial sweeteners do not lose weight. That, and this was the main hope when these sweeteners were first introduced. I mean, they've been around a long time. Saccharin has been around over 100 years, but the others, around 30 or 40 years. And the hope always was that this would curb the obesity epidemic. But we now have the concrete evidence that it doesn't. And it's the old story of someone putting an artificial sweetener into their coffee and being so pleased with themselves that they'll have the piece of cake that they wouldn't have had they put sugar in the coffee, but the cake will have more sugar than they would have put in the coffee. Yeah. Instant will have somewhat less caffeine, somewhat less, but also less flavor, right? Yeah, I mean, life equals out, People who are bald have more face to wash.
We also have a question about oatmeal.
Less hair to comb. Yeah?
They're asking, what about oatmeal for breakfast as opposed to cereal?
Yeah, oatmeal. Yeah, well, oatmeal is a cereal, right? It's made from oats. It's a cereal. Steel cut oats is certainly a very acceptable breakfast. I would say that you pump it up a little with putting berries in there. Because the thing is that straight oatmeal is not sweet, right? So you got to do something to give it a bit of taste. Stanley. What? Maple syrup or sugar? I mean, the Quebec maple syrup industry funds all kinds of studies to show that maple syrup contains antioxidants, which it does. The amounts are irrelevant. I mean, eat maple syrup by all means if you like maple syrup. I do. I'll have it on a pancake or whatever. I mean, it's much better than the corn syrup that they usually give you in the restaurant. I mean, you want to make sure that it's real maple syrup, but it's sugar. That's why. Well, no, he didn't know about disinfectants. Just about being clean is better than being dirty. But that was known by the ancient Greeks and the ancient Romans. I mean, Romans took baths all the time. No. No. Yeah. What's it like you're talking about the Keurig cups? I hope not, because that's what I drink every morning. So I don't really worry about that. I mean, the nanoplastics, which are worth worrying about, but those get into our food supply in every way, because they're in the water, so they get into your food. So anything that might add to that because of your Keurig cup is going to be negligible. But also, you can't worry about every trivial thing because it will make you crazy. It's, yeah. Organic is a scam. There's no nutritional benefit to organic. There might be some environmental benefit, but no nutritional benefit. And that too has been studied and studied and studied, analyzed and people have, I mean, this could be a whole talk on this, but people have the impression that organic doesn't use pesticides, which is not true. There are dozens of pesticides that are used in organic agriculture. The only stipulation is that they must come from a natural source. But because they come from a natural source doesn't make them any safer. For example, they use copper sulfate, widely used in organic agriculture because you can mine it. So it's a naturally occurring substance. Well, copper sulfate is a toxic substance. Now, of course, when you use it as a pesticide, it's regulated. Organic pesticides are regulated the same way as any other pesticide. But this idea that because it's natural, it's safer, makes no sense. I mean, it's safe enough because there are limits on how much of it you can use. And again, studies have shown that people who buy organic actually end up eating fewer fruits and vegetables because of the expense. So I say, eat lots of fruits and vegetables and don't worry if they're organic or not. That's organic. French, that's the French word for organic, is biological. Yeah. No, they lead solder, which was used to close the can, that hasn't been used for over 20 years. There's no lead in cans. Yeah. No. Again, reams of studies on that. Okay. They drinking liquids helps. Doesn't matter what the liquid is. Yeah, drink cranberry juice if you like cranberry juice. Yeah. T cells. T cells are a very important part of the immune system. I mean, they're. Oh, no. I mean, there's no. You're not going to affect your distribution of immune cells by food. Yeah. Yeah, well, the thing is with coumadin, you have to be careful about vitamin K content because the reason taking coumadin is to quote thin the blood, which is actually a misnomer, but you want to prevent the blood from coagulating. Okay, so you have to stay away from anything that contains vitamin K because that would coagulate the blood. So you can't take broccoli, for example. That's the classic example. Or, anything that has a good dose of vitamin K. Yes. Yeah. Banana. Yeah. No, but well, banana. No, banana has potassium. Yeah. Well, then you die a little. Yeah. The Quaker oats. Yeah. 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 Just don't get the one that has sugar in it. Well, there's several kinds of Quaker oats that you can buy. There's the instant Quaker oats, right? You just add hot water to that. That will have a lot of sugar. That the sugar is already in the packet. So buy the one in the box or in the bag that you have to cook yourself, because then you can control what you can add to it. Yeah. Sorry. Uh, yeah, if you take Eloquist also, they will give you a sheet about foods to avoid. Yeah. Although I think it's not as critical with Eliquis as it is with Coumadin. Yeah. You can find all of the amino acids in vegetables. You can have a perfectly nutritious vegetarian, even vegan diet. You just have to make sure you're getting your protein sources. You're getting your beans or lentils, whatever. But it is totally possible to have a healthy vegetarian diet, probably even preferable. All right, so we'll see you next month.